The last loaf at Bastogne, the siege, the snow, and the taste of hope, the empty mess. Tin. Before you settle into another quiet journey through history, imagine a forest so silent that even your own breathing seems unusually loud. So before you get comfortable, take a moment, like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It is December 1944. You are standing among the snow-covered pine forests surrounding Bastogne in Belgium, where the men of the American 101st Airborne Division and attached units have become encircled during what history remembers as the Battle of the Bulge. The newspapers would later celebrate the siege as one of courage and determination, but they rarely pause to describe something much smaller, what happened when breakfast slowly disappeared. The morning begins with cold rather than light. You open your eyes inside a shallow foxhole lined with pine boughs. Overnight, frost has formed along the inside of your blanket. Your boots feel stiff after hours beside frozen earth, and your rifle, carefully kept dry beneath your shelter half, carries a thin layer of icy moisture that must be wiped away before anything else. Routine comes before comfort. Long before thoughts of enemy patrols or artillery, you inspect your weapon, brush snow from your helmet, and stretch fingers that ache from the freezing air. Around you, dozens of other soldiers perform the same quiet ritual. Nobody rushes. Cold has a way of slowing every movement. Ordinarily, mornings in an American army camp begin with field kitchens. Large insulated containers of coffee arrive from mobile kitchens farther behind the lines. Cooks prepare powdered eggs, oatmeal, bacon when available, or thick slices of bread spread with jam or butter. Army planners devoted enormous attention to feeding soldiers because they understood a simple truth. An army marches not only on discipline, but on calories. At Bastogne, those carefully organized supply lines have been broken. German forces have surrounded the town. Roads that once carried trucks loaded with flour, canned meat, medical supplies, and fuel now lie under enemy observation or control. Snowstorms have grounded many transport aircraft. Supplies exist, but somewhere beyond the clouds. You reach into your haversack. Inside rests your mess tin. It feels unexpectedly light. Yesterday's meal has left behind only a scattering of biscuit crumbs gathered into one corner of the metal. You tip the tin gently, collecting every fragment with careful attention. Each crumb disappears into your mouth one at a time. No one watching would laugh. Nearly every soldier nearby is doing something similar. One man carefully scrapes the inside of an empty cheese tin using the edge of a pocket knife. Another unwraps half a chocolate bar he has hidden for several days inside an extra wool sock, hoping it would stay from freezing solid. Two friends divide a single packet of crackers into equal portions with remarkable precision. War has transformed ordinary food into careful mathematics. Military diaries written during the siege frequently mention hunger not as dramatic suffering, but as a constant companion. Men spoke about meals more often than battles. They remembered recipes from home. They debated the best bread their mothers baked. Some admitted dreaming about simple bowls of soup. Hunger quietly rearranges memory. As snow continues falling, someone begins melting handfuls of it inside a steel helmet placed above a tiny gasoline stove. Every soldier has been warned never to eat snow directly if it can be avoided. Frozen snow lowers body temperature, forcing the body to spend valuable energy warming itself. Even obtaining drinking water requires precious fuel. Everything now depends upon conservation: fuel, food, dry socks, rifle oil, candles, matches. Nothing is wasted. The company cook walks through the position carrying little more than hot water flavored with the last remaining coffee grounds. Nobody complains about how weak it tastes. Warmth itself has become part of the meal. Nearby, medics quietly inspect soldiers' feet before checking for wounds. Frostbite has become nearly as dangerous as enemy bullets. Dry socks are guarded almost as carefully as ammunition. A soldier unable to walk because of frozen feet cannot help defend the line. Weather has become another enemy. Clouds remain thick overhead, hiding the transport aircraft waiting farther away. Thousands of food containers have already been prepared elsewhere. Quartermasters have packed rations, blankets, ammunition, and medicine into parachute bundles. Pilots watch weather reports with growing impatience. The men inside Bastogne know none of these details. They simply wait. The afternoon passes repairing equipment rather than fighting. Machine gun crews remove moisture from ammunition belts. Radio operators warm battery packs beneath heavy jackets because freezing temperatures weaken them. Engineers strengthen foxholes as fresh snow slowly covers yesterday's footprints. Routine continues because routine keeps fear under control. As evening arrives, conversation turns toward kitchens left behind. One soldier remembers fresh apple pie cooling on a farmhouse window. Another quietly describes thick slices of homemade bread spread with butter that melted before reaching the edges. Someone else wonders aloud whether the local bakery in his hometown has already begun preparing Christmas loaves. No one speaks for several minutes afterward. The silence is comfortable. Memory itself has become nourishment. Darkness settles early across the Ardennes forest. You wrap your blanket tighter, pull your helmet lower against the wind, and place your nearly empty mess tin beside your pack for tomorrow. It weighs almost nothing, yet somehow it feels heavier than ever. Waiting for the supply drop. Another dawn arrives hidden behind thick grey clouds. The snow has stopped, but the sky remains sealed shut, as though the weather itself has forgotten that hundreds of hungry soldiers are waiting below. You begin another day, exactly as the previous one ended, with routine. Weapons are cleaned, positions are inspected, firewood is gathered carefully without exposing anyone unnecessarily. Each task appears ordinary, almost boring, yet every completed chore quietly increases the chances of surviving another freezing night. Military historians often describe Bastogne through maps and arrows showing armoured divisions advancing across Belgium. Those maps rarely include the invisible work happening behind every foxhole. Someone is always melting snow. Someone is always repairing boots. Someone is always counting the remaining ration boxes. The quartermaster's inventory grows painfully short. Individual C rations, designed to sustain soldiers through temporary shortages, have become long-term meals. A single can of meat and beans may now be shared between several men. Hard biscuits are softened in hot water to protect cracked teeth. Sugar packets disappear first. Coffee remains precious beyond measure. Many soldiers save a portion of it not because it satisfies hunger, but because its familiar smell reminds them of peaceful mornings before the war. Letters from home are read repeatedly. Some have already been unfolded dozens of times. The paper softens at the edges from cold fingers. One soldier reads a recipe his wife included months earlier for Christmas cookies. Another carries a grocery list written by his mother before deployment. These ordinary scraps of paper now seem strangely valuable. The human mind has a remarkable habit. When food becomes scarce, memory serves the feast. Then, sometime after midday, a sound interrupts the quiet rhythm of maintenance and waiting. At first, it is distant, barely noticeable. Several soldiers stop working and listen. Aircraft. Not one, many. Heads tilt upward. The cloud cover has finally begun to break. Tiny openings appear between layers of grey, allowing weak winter sunlight to spill across the snow for the first time in days. Soon, the unmistakable shape of transport aircraft becomes visible overhead. Hundreds of parachutes begin blooming across the sky, white, olive drab, brightly coloured identification chutes. Boxes descend slowly toward frozen fields and woodland clearings. Some drift safely into American positions. Others land between opposing lines. A few disappear into forests where recovery will prove dangerous. But many arrive. The mood changes instantly, not into celebration, but into quiet relief. Soldiers hurry toward the supply bundles. Inside are blankets, medical supplies, ammunition, most importantly, food. Crates contain K-rations, canned meat, powdered beverages, chewing gum, chocolate bars, crackers, and packets of instant coffee. The meals remain simple by civilian standards. To the men at Bastogne, they seem extraordinary. No banquet has ever been welcomed more warmly than those plain military rations. That evening you open your first complete meal in several days. The crackers are dry, the meat is salty, the coffee is thin. It is wonderful. A quiet Christmas meal. Christmas arrives beneath the same cold sky. Snow still blankets the forests surrounding Bastogne, softening the ruined landscape into something unexpectedly peaceful. The siege is not yet entirely over, but the worst uncertainty has begun to pass. Supply routes slowly improve. More aircraft arrive. Convoys cautiously push toward the town. Field kitchens begin operating again wherever conditions allow. For the first time in many days, the smell of hot food drifts through parts of the defensive perimeter. It is impossible to describe how powerful that smell becomes. Steam rising from soup carries more than warmth. It carries reassurance. Army cooks work tirelessly despite limited equipment. Large kettles simmer with stew made from canned meat, dehydrated vegetables, and whatever fresh ingredients can be obtained locally. Fresh bread remains rare, but coffee becomes more plentiful. Some units receive a special Christmas dinner. Others simply receive enough food to feel comfortably full again. Both are remembered with equal gratitude. The official menus varied from unit to unit, but surviving records and veterans' recollections mention turkey where available, mashed potatoes prepared from dehydrated flakes, gravy, canned fruit, bread, coffee, and sometimes even small portions of cake or pudding. Nobody complains if something is missing. Expectation has changed. After days of counting crumbs, abundance means simply eating until hunger disappears. You sit quietly beside several fellow soldiers. Nobody rushes through the meal. Conversation comes easily again. Someone tells a story from childhood. Another laughs about learning to cook after the war. One man quietly admits he never wants to see another military biscuit for the rest of his life. The others smile. Not because the joke is especially funny, because laughter has finally returned. Historians often remember Bastogne because of battlefield decisions, armoured breakthroughs, and determined defence. Those achievements certainly mattered, but beneath every famous victory stood thousands of ordinary moments almost too small to appear in history books. A cook stirring soup, a soldier sharing half a chocolate bar, a medic insisting that frozen socks be changed, a pilot guiding food through winter skies, a quartermaster counting the final ration box. Wars are not sustained by heroism alone, they are sustained by logistics, by patience, by routine, and by people who quietly refuse to waste even a single crumb. As evening settles over Bastogne once more, you finish the last sip of warm coffee and look across the snow-covered forest. The silence feels different now. Not because the war has ended, it has not, but because hope has returned alongside the food. Sometimes history changes because of great battles. Sometimes it changes because one transport aircraft finally finds a break in the clouds. Boiling leather boots. During Napoleon's retreat from Moscow, when hunger consumed an empire. The long road out of Moscow. Take a slow breath and imagine that the snow beneath your boots stretches farther than you can see. It is November 1812. You are a soldier of Napoleon Bonaparte's Grande Armée, one of the largest military forces Europe had ever assembled. Only months earlier, nearly 600,000 men from France and across Napoleon's allied states had marched confidently eastward toward Moscow. The campaign promised a decisive victory. Instead, you now begin the long journey home through a landscape already claimed by winter. The city of Moscow lies behind you. It offered little salvation. Much of it had burned after its occupation, leaving behind abandoned buildings, ruined storehouses, and far fewer supplies than Napoleon expected. The army lingered for weeks, hoping that Tsar Alexander I would negotiate peace. The negotiations never came. Now the retreat has begun. At first the column appears endless. Infantry marches beside cavalry. Cannon rumbles slowly over frozen roads. Supply wagons creak beneath what little food remains. Civilians who had followed the army, craftsmen, servants, merchants, and families move alongside soldiers. Horses pull until exhaustion forces them to stop. The farther you walk, the quieter everyone becomes. There is little energy for conversation. Every step conserves warmth. Every movement costs precious calories. Military campaigns are often remembered through battles, but armies spend far more time marching than fighting. Napoleon's army had relied on carefully organized supply depots during earlier campaigns across Europe. Food normally followed the army through an immense logistical network of wagons, bakeries, mills, and local requisitioning. Russia proved different. Distances were enormous. Roads became seas of mud during autumn before freezing solid. Russian forces frequently withdrew instead of defending towns, removing livestock and grain while destroying supplies that might aid the invaders. Modern historians describe this as a combination of strategic withdrawal and scorched earth tactics. Whatever food remained became increasingly difficult to find. You notice the ration wagons growing smaller each day. The bread issued this morning is already stale. Many soldiers receive only a fraction of what regulations once promised. Salted meat has become scarce. Fresh vegetables disappeared long ago. Soon, even official rations become uncertain. The cold deepens. Your wool coat stiffens with frost. The leather straps of your pack creak each time you adjust the weight on your shoulders. Snow falls gently, covering wagon tracks almost as quickly as they are made. The silence is deceptive. Not because of nearby fighting, but because hunger has a way of quieting people. Someone ahead removes a glove to adjust a buckle. Within moments, his fingers begin to ache from the cold. Another soldier carefully wraps cloth around worn boots whose soles are beginning to separate. Shoemakers still travel with parts of the army, repairing footwear whenever possible, but leather itself is becoming increasingly scarce. Boots are no longer just clothing, they are survival. Every evening, camps are established wherever daylight ends. There are no comfortable tents for most men. Instead, small fires appear where enough wood can be gathered. Soldiers crowd together for warmth. Smoke drifts slowly upward into the frozen air. The cooks have almost nothing left to cook. A small kettle hangs above glowing embers. Inside, melted snow warms with a handful of barley collected days earlier. Several men share the thin broth. Each receives only a few mouthfuls. No one complains. Complaints require strength. As darkness settles across the Russian countryside, you remove one boot and inspect the worn leather. It has become cracked from constant freezing and thawing. You rub animal fat onto the surface to keep it flexible, using the last of a precious supply carried since leaving Moscow. Beside you, another soldier quietly remarks that leather itself must never go to waste. At first, the comment seems only practical. You do not yet realize how literal those words will soon become. When leather became dinner, another week passes. Winter tightens its grip. Food wagons disappear one after another, abandoned when horses collapse from exhaustion or starvation. Without horses, heavy wagons cannot move. Without wagons, the remaining supplies never reach the men who need them most. The army continues west. It grows smaller every day, not only because of combat or illness, but because hunger slowly weakens everyone. Official army rations have nearly vanished. Whatever food can be found comes from abandoned villages, hidden root cellars, or fields where frozen turnips remain buried beneath the snow. Sometimes a few handfuls of grain are discovered inside ruined barns. Sometimes nothing is found at all. The search for food becomes part of the daily routine. Before dawn, small groups spread quietly through nearby woods and villages, hoping to find anything edible. They return carrying bundles of firewood, occasionally a rabbit, more often empty hands. Then the unimaginable slowly becomes ordinary. When horses die along the roadside, soldiers gather around them. There is no ceremony. The meat is carefully removed before freezing solid. Nothing edible is wasted. Veterans later wrote about boiling strips of horsehide to soften them enough to chew. Historical accounts also describe soldiers simmering pieces of leather from harnesses, saddlebags, and worn boots. Leather offered almost no nutrition after tanning, but prolonged boiling made it slightly softer and allowed desperate men to trick empty stomachs into believing they had eaten. The process takes hours. A small iron pot hangs over a weak fire. Snow melts into water. Strips of leather are scraped clean as thoroughly as possible before being placed inside. The water slowly darkens. Steam rises. The smell resembles neither meat nor bread, only damp leather. You wait patiently. There is nothing else to do. Eventually, the leather becomes flexible enough to bite. It remains difficult to chew. It provides almost no comfort. Yet the act of eating itself offers a strange kind of hope. Nearby, another soldier stirs a pot containing boiled oats mixed with melted snow and fragments of dried roots gathered beneath frozen shrubs. Nobody asks whether the meal tastes good. The question has become meaningless. The important question is simpler. Will there be another meal tomorrow? The answer remains uncertain. The taste of survival. Weeks later, the army approaches the Berezina River. Crossing it will become one of the most difficult moments of the retreat, but tonight your thoughts remain focused on something much smaller, a loaf of bread. Rumors spread that supply wagons have finally caught part of the column. Some dismiss the stories immediately. Others choose to believe them. Hope itself has become nourishment. Near sunset, a group of engineers completes another section of temporary bridge, while cooks begin distributing what little flour has arrived. The bread is coarse. It contains bran, damaged grain, and whatever flour millers could salvage. It is beautiful. Each soldier receives only a small piece. You turn it slowly in your hands before taking the first bite. The crust is hard from the cold. The inside remains warm. For a brief moment, the endless road disappears. The snow seems less bitter. Even conversation returns. One soldier recalls the baker in his village. Another remembers fresh cheese served with warm bread during harvest season. The memories no longer feel painful. They feel comforting. Historians estimate that only a fraction of the Grande Armée survived the retreat from Russia. Cold, disease, exhaustion, and starvation combined into one of history's greatest military disasters. Yet within those staggering numbers were countless ordinary moments rarely discussed. Men patiently melting snow, friends sharing the final crust of bread, camp cooks scraping the bottom of empty kettles, engineers building bridges while hungry themselves. An empire's campaign ultimately depended not only on strategy, but on wagons, flour, horses, weather, and meals that never arrived. As darkness settles once more over the frozen Russian plain, you finish your final piece of bread and quietly place the empty tin beside the dying fire. Tomorrow will bring another march, another snowfall, another search for food. But tonight, for the first time in many days, your stomach is not completely empty. And sometimes, during the longest journeys in history, that was enough to keep one more soldier walking toward home. Story 3. Rice mixed with sawdust. Hunger in the jungles of Guadalcanal. The last sack of rice. Take a slow breath and imagine replacing snow with heavy tropical air. The cold forests of Europe are now far behind you. Instead, you stand beneath towering coconut palms and dense jungle canopies on the island of Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands. It is late 1942, and the air is so humid that your uniform never truly dries. Every morning begins with the sound of insects, distant birds, and the steady drip of water falling from broad green leaves. You are a soldier in the Imperial Japanese Army. When your unit first landed on Guadalcanal, officers expected a swift campaign. Supplies would arrive regularly by ship. Rice, dried fish, soy products, tea, and preserved vegetables would follow the troops as they had in previous operations. Instead, the sea itself became an enemy. The Allied naval campaign steadily disrupted Japanese shipping. American aircraft operating from Henderson Field attacked cargo vessels during daylight. Destroyers made dangerous nighttime supply runs, known later as the Tokyo Express, but these fast ships carried soldiers far more easily than they carried food. A rifle weighs little compared to sacks of rice. A soldier can survive for days without ammunition being fired. He cannot survive long without eating. As weeks pass, the supply ships become fewer. The sacks of rice stacked beneath palm-thatched shelters slowly disappear. Quartermasters begin recording numbers that no commander wishes to see. 1 sack, half a sack. Only a few wooden boxes remain. Breakfast changes almost without anyone noticing. At first, each bowl simply contains a little less rice than before. Then, barley is mixed into it. Later, sweet potatoes collected from nearby gardens appear beside the rice. Eventually, the rice itself becomes the smaller ingredient. Every grain matters. You kneel beside the company cook as he measures portions with extraordinary care. His wooden scoop moves slowly from one sack to another. Every bowl must be nearly identical. No soldier should receive noticeably more than another. Fairness becomes almost as important as food itself. Steam rises gently from the cooking pot. The familiar scent of rice fills the humid air. For a few moments, everyone forgets how little remains. The meal is eaten slowly, not because there is much to eat, because everyone wishes it would last longer. Military regulations of the Imperial Japanese Army placed great importance on rice as the foundation of daily nutrition. It was more than food. It represented routine, discipline, and home. Many soldiers wrote in letters and diaries that a bowl of warm rice brought comfort, even during difficult campaigns. Now that comfort is fading, the jungle provides life everywhere you look, yet surprisingly little that can be safely eaten. Thick vines twist through enormous trees, bright flowers bloom beside muddy trails, unknown fruits hang overhead. But identifying edible plants requires knowledge few soldiers possess. Mistakes can be deadly. Instead of charging into battle, many afternoons are now spent searching quietly for anything useful. Bananas, wild taro, coconuts. Occasionally small fish caught in nearby streams, sometimes nothing at all. The jungle is generous only to those who understand it. Most of the soldiers do not. As evening approaches, rain begins once again. It falls heavily against broad leaves before dripping steadily into puddles that never seem to disappear. You pull a waterproof sheet over your pack. Inside rests your rice bowl. You clean it carefully despite knowing tomorrow's meal may be even smaller. Clean equipment prevents disease. Disease now threatens almost as much as hunger. Around the fire, conversation turns not toward victory but toward kitchens hundreds of miles away. One man remembers his mother's miso soup. Another quietly describes grilled fish eaten during village festivals. Someone laughs while recalling how he once complained about eating rice 3 times a day. No one laughs very long. Memory has become another form of nourishment. The cook closes the final full sack of rice before darkness settles over the camp. He ties the rope carefully around its opening. Tomorrow, it will be opened again, but not for long. Stretching, every grain days become weeks. The supply situation continues to worsen. The company cook now begins each morning by looking not at his cooking pots but at his inventory. There is little left to count. Rice must be stretched farther than anyone once imagined possible. Historical accounts from Guadalcanal describe desperate attempts to increase the volume of meals by mixing rice with whatever could safely or sometimes unsafely be gathered. Soldiers added wild roots, jungle leaves, grated coconut, ground palm pith, and occasionally other fibrous materials simply to make a bowl appear fuller. Some later recollections even mention rice mixed with sawdust or finely shaved wood in moments of extreme desperation. Such mixtures offered almost no nourishment and could not sustain health, but they reflected the extraordinary lengths to which hungry men sometimes went in an effort to quiet an empty stomach. The company cook works carefully. He stirs the pot longer than usual, not because the meal requires more cooking, because he hopes every bowl will look equal. Steam still rises. The familiar fragrance of rice is now faint, almost hidden beneath the smell of damp roots and jungle plants. You accept your bowl without complaint. Everyone does. Complaining cannot create more food. Instead, daily routine continues. Weapons are cleaned, uniforms are patched, boots are dried beside smoky fires that never burn well in the humid climate. Officers continue inspections. Medics continue treating malaria, dysentery, and tropical ulcers. The army still functions, only more slowly. By afternoon, foraging parties disappear into the jungle. They move carefully, not only because of enemy patrols, but because every edible plant matters. Coconut palms become treasured landmarks. Streams are checked repeatedly for freshwater shrimp or fish. Even snails collected after rainstorms may become part of the evening meal. Nothing is ignored. The jungle determines the menu. That night, rain drums steadily against leaves overhead. You finish another modest bowl and realize that hunger has changed. It is no longer sharp. It has become quiet, constant, almost familiar. A bowl shared in silence. By early 1943, the situation on Guadalcanal has become impossible to ignore. Disease spreads, food continues disappearing. Many soldiers have lost significant weight. Simple tasks now require enormous effort. Walking uphill feels like carrying twice the weight. Lifting ammunition boxes leaves arms trembling, yet routine survives. Every morning the cook still lights his fire. Every evening soldiers still gather around cooking pots. The meals are small, the ritual remains important. One afternoon, a supply run finally succeeds. Not enough to restore full rations, only enough to offer hope. Several sacks of rice arrive together with dried fish and tea. The quartermaster smiles for the first time in weeks. Each soldier receives a slightly larger portion that evening. No feast follows, only an ordinary bowl of rice. But ordinary things become extraordinary after scarcity. You sit beside several comrades beneath swaying palm trees while twilight settles across the island. Nobody speaks much. The sound of insects fills the warm evening. Steam rises gently from your bowl. For a few peaceful minutes, hunger loosens its grip. Modern historians often focus on Guadalcanal as a turning point in the Pacific War. Naval battles, airfields, and strategic decisions dominate many accounts. Yet beneath those great events lived thousands of ordinary soldiers whose daily concerns centered on much smaller questions. Would the rice last another day? Would the next destroyer arrive? Would tomorrow's meal contain enough to keep marching? Wars are remembered through victories and defeats. They are endured one meal at a time. As darkness slowly settles over the jungle, you rinse your bowl with carefully collected rainwater and place it beside your pack. Tomorrow, the cook will light another fire. Another handful of rice will be measured. Another day will begin beneath the endless green canopy. And somewhere beyond the horizon, ships carrying food will once again try to reach an island where every single grain has become precious. Hardtack and salt pork. The daily diet of the American Civil War opening the ration box. Take a slow, comfortable breath and imagine the first light of dawn spreading across a quiet military camp. The year is 1863. You are a Union infantryman serving with the Army of the Potomac somewhere in Virginia. The great battles of the American Civil War often dominate history books, but this morning, like most mornings, begins not with gunfire, but with waiting. The camp slowly wakes. Canvas tents stand in long, orderly rows across a gently sloping field. Thin smoke rises from hundreds of small cooking fires. Somewhere nearby, a bugler sounds reveille, though many soldiers have already been awake for some time. Blankets are folded, boots are laced, and coffee pots are placed over glowing coals. Before drills begin, there is breakfast, or at least whatever breakfast the quartermaster has managed to provide. The Army of the Potomac depends on one of the largest logistical systems ever assembled in North America. Flour mills, bakeries, slaughterhouses, railroads, riverboats, and long wagon trains all work together to keep hundreds of thousands of soldiers supplied. When everything functions well, fresh bread, vegetables, and meat occasionally reach the camps. But campaigns rarely allow everything to function well. Instead, the meal that appears most often is built around two remarkably ordinary items: hardtack and salt pork. The company quartermaster opens a sturdy wooden crate that has travelled hundreds of miles by rail and wagon. Inside are neatly stacked square crackers known officially as hardtack, but affectionately nicknamed by soldiers as tooth dullers, sheet iron crackers, or simply hardtack. Each biscuit is made from little more than flour, water, and salt. There is no yeast, no butter, no sugar. Its simplicity is exactly what makes it valuable. Without moisture, the crackers can survive months, sometimes years, without spoiling if kept reasonably dry. You accept your daily portion. The biscuit feels surprisingly heavy. Its surface is stamped with small holes that helped it bake evenly, though they also collect dust after long journeys inside supply wagons. Veterans know better than to bite directly into a fresh-issued hardtack. Instead, many soak it in coffee. Others crumble it into soup. Some strike it gently against a rifle butt to remove loose crumbs, and occasionally the tiny insects that sometimes found their way inside during long storage. The jokes about hardtack became famous among Civil War soldiers. Letters home often described the crackers with surprising humour. Laughter, it seemed, made even the hardest meals easier to accept. Beside the crackers sits another familiar ration: salt pork. Before refrigeration, preserving meat required generous amounts of salt. Thick cuts of pork were packed into barrels layered with coarse salt, allowing them to survive long transportation. The process kept the meat edible. It also made it extraordinarily salty. Army cooks usually boiled the pork first, removing some of the excess salt before frying or mixing it into stews. When water was scarce, however, there was little choice but to cook it as it came. Breakfast begins quietly. Coffee, brewed from roasted beans issued in whole form, fills the cool morning air with a rich aroma. Soldiers often took pride in preparing good coffee, carefully grinding beans using rifle butts, rocks, or the bottoms of tin cups when proper grinders were unavailable. A warm cup of coffee became one of the most cherished comforts in camp life. You dip a piece of hardtack into the steaming cup. Slowly, the biscuit softens. The first bite is still firm, but it is warm. Sometimes that is enough. Around you, conversations drift toward ordinary life. One soldier discusses planting corn back home. Another wonders whether his family's apple orchard has already begun to bloom. Someone complains jokingly that hardtack could probably survive another 100 years. No one disagrees. The meal is simple, predictable, perhaps even boring. Yet this quiet routine repeats itself across hundreds of camps throughout the Civil War. History often remembers generals. But every morning, history also depended on bakers, butchers, wagon drivers, railroad engineers, and quartermasters who ensured that one more crate of hardtack reached another hungry regiment. Campfire cooking. The afternoon passes in familiar rhythm: drills, equipment inspections, fence repairs, uniform mending. The work is repetitive, yet every task serves a purpose. Military camps function almost like small towns, requiring cooks, blacksmiths, carpenters, teamsters, farriers, surgeons, and clerks alongside infantrymen. As evening approaches, cooking fires begin appearing once more. Each company develops its own traditions. Some soldiers become known for brewing particularly strong coffee. Others discover clever ways to improve otherwise plain rations. One popular dish becomes known simply as skilly-gaily. The recipe is wonderfully uncomplicated. Hardtack is broken into pieces, soaked briefly in water, and then fried in pork grease until golden brown. The result remains humble, but considerably more enjoyable than eating dry crackers. Another favourite is slumgullion, a stew whose ingredients vary according to whatever happens to be available. Salt pork, beans, potatoes, onions, occasionally carrots or cabbage. Every kettle tells a slightly different story. Fresh vegetables become treasured additions whenever local farms or supply wagons provide them. Army regulations encouraged balanced diets whenever possible because officers understood that nutrition directly affected health. Vitamin deficiencies, digestive illness, and fatigue spread quickly when diets became too limited. Medical officers repeatedly requested fresh produce, though wartime logistics often made such requests difficult to fulfill. Tonight, fortune smiles upon your company. A nearby farmer has traded several baskets of onions in exchange for coffee and preserved meat. The onions are sliced carefully. Nothing is wasted. Their sharp aroma fills the camp as they sizzle beside salt pork in black iron pans. For a brief moment, the meal resembles something from home. Around the fire, stories replace silence. Veterans speak about earlier campaigns. New recruits listen closely. Coffee cups are refilled. Hardtack disappears piece by piece. The stars slowly emerge overhead. Tomorrow's march remains uncertain. Tonight's supper is enough. The bread wagon arrives. Several days later, unexpected excitement spreads quietly through the camp. The supply train has arrived. Long wagon columns roll slowly across the dusty road, their wooden wheels creaking beneath heavy loads. Teamsters guide sturdy mules while quartermasters compare shipping manifests against carefully written inventories. Fresh supplies have finally caught up with the army. Among barrels of flour and crates of ammunition sits something far less dramatic: fresh bread. Not every regiment receives it immediately, but your company is fortunate. Army bakers working in mobile field bakeries have spent the previous night mixing flour, water, yeast, and salt before tending large ovens mounted behind the lines. The loaves emerge with crisp crusts and soft centers. Compared to hardtack, they seem almost luxurious. Each soldier receives only a modest slice. You hold it for a moment before eating. The crust crackles gently. The inside remains warm enough that steam escapes into the cool morning air. Conversation nearly stops. Everyone simply enjoys the taste. The bread will not last. Within another day or two, the army will almost certainly return to hardtack as campaigns continue moving across Virginia. Yet this single meal reminds everyone what ordinary food feels like. Historians estimate that Union armies consumed astonishing quantities of supplies each day, thousands of pounds of meat, flour, coffee, sugar, beans, and forage for animals. Behind every battle stood an enormous network of farmers, millers, bakers, railroad workers, riverboat crews, warehouse clerks, and wagon drivers. Without them, armies could not march. Without bread, victories became impossible. As the morning sun climbs higher, you finish the final bite of fresh bread and carefully fold the cloth that carried it. Tomorrow may bring another march, another ration of hardtack, another pot of strong coffee over a smoky campfire. But today, for just a little while, the taste of warm bread reminds everyone that even during war, ordinary comforts remain worth remembering. Sometimes the smallest meal leaves the longest memory. Frozen horse meat, surviving the winter of Stalingrad. The empty field kitchen, settle comfortably, and imagine the sound of wind moving across a city of shattered brick and frozen steel. It is December 1942. You are a soldier of the German 6th Army, surrounded inside the ruins of Stalingrad on the western bank of the Volga River. Only a few months earlier, long supply columns rolled steadily across the wide plains of southern Russia. Mobile field kitchens followed the advancing divisions. Bread arrived daily from army bakeries. Meat, potatoes, coffee substitutes, and canned vegetables were distributed according to carefully planned schedules. Now the roads have disappeared beneath snow. The army itself has become surrounded. Operation Uranus, the Soviet counteroffensive launched in November, has closed the ring around the city. Every loaf of bread, every sack of flour, and every barrel of fuel must now come by air, an impossible task for an army numbering hundreds of thousands. The morning begins before sunrise. The cold is unlike anything you have experienced before. Ice forms inside damaged buildings where soldiers shelter behind broken walls. Blankets stiffen overnight. Water left inside tin cups freezes solid. Even simple tasks, buttoning a coat, tying bootlaces, loading ammunition, become slower as fingers lose warmth. You walk toward the company field kitchen. The familiar wagon still stands where it always has. Its iron stove is cold. The cook lifts the lid from an empty kettle. There is almost nothing inside. Once, this kitchen prepared thick soups filled with potatoes, barley, and meat. Fresh bread was sliced each morning. Coffee substitute brewed in large containers before dawn. Today, the cook scrapes together the final handfuls of dried vegetables remaining in a canvas sack. He pauses before adding them to boiling water. There is no reason to hurry. There is so little to cook. Military records from Stalingrad reveal that food shortages developed gradually before becoming severe. Ration scales were reduced several times as supplies dwindled. Bread portions became smaller. Meat disappeared first. Fresh vegetables had long since vanished. Horses, once essential for pulling artillery and wagons, slowly became another source of food. The men understand what is happening without anyone explaining it. They simply notice the portions shrinking. A slice of bread becomes half a slice. Soup becomes thinner. Coffee cups contain more hot water than flavor. Nobody wastes crumbs. You sit on a broken stone step and examine your breakfast. One small piece of dark bread, a tin cup of watery soup. Nothing more. Around you, dozens of soldiers eat in silence. No one rushes. Eating slowly cannot create more food, yet it allows the meal to last a little longer. Outside, the wind carries fine snow through shattered windows. A horse stands nearby beside an abandoned wagon. Its ribs are visible beneath its winter coat. It has worked for months, hauling ammunition through ruined streets. Now it struggles simply to stand. The soldiers look toward it quietly. Nobody says anything, but everyone understands. When the horses were gone, the weeks pass with remarkable sameness. Snow, wind, waiting, the sound of distant artillery, and the constant question of food. By January 1943, many of the horses that had once supplied the 6th Army are gone. Some died from exhaustion, others from hunger. Many were slaughtered because they represented the only substantial source of meat remaining. Historical accounts from German veterans describe horse meat becoming one of the principal foods available during the final months inside the Stalingrad pocket. Army cooks did what they could with almost nothing. The work remained surprisingly methodical. The meat was carefully cut into portions. Bones were saved for broth. Fat, when available, was treasured. Nothing edible was discarded. Large kettles returned to life. Inside them simmered horse meat, melted snow, dried peas if any remained, and scraps collected from dwindling supply stores. The aroma drifting through ruined streets no longer resembled the meals soldiers had known earlier in the campaign, yet warm food remained warm food. You stand patiently in line with your mess tin. Nobody pushes. Everyone understands there is only one serving. The cook fills each container with almost mathematical precision, equal portions, equal hope. Nearby, another soldier carefully saves half his bread for evening. Others trade cigarettes for extra soup. One quietly writes in a notebook before supper. Many diaries from Stalingrad mention food constantly, not because soldiers wished to complain, but because hunger occupied nearly every thought. Someone remembers fresh rye bread from Bavaria. Another speaks softly about potato soup prepared by his grandmother. A third recalls apples stored in a cellar during autumn. The memories seem almost unreal now. Outside, temperatures continue falling. Inside, ruined factories and apartment blocks. Tiny stoves burn broken furniture for fuel. Wooden chairs, doors, floorboards, anything that produces heat. The soup kettle bubbles gently. Steam fills the room. For a few precious minutes, everyone forgets the cold. The last warm meal. The end approaches quietly. There is no single moment when everyone realizes it. Instead, daily routines simply become smaller. Field kitchens prepare fewer meals. Medical stations receive fewer supplies. The bread wagon no longer arrives. Still, the cooks continue working. Even with almost nothing left, they light fires each morning. Military discipline survives. Routine survives. One afternoon, your company receives a final shipment dropped from transport aircraft. The delivery is far smaller than needed. A few sacks of flour, some dried vegetables, several boxes of preserved meat. The quartermaster distributes everything immediately. That evening, the cook prepares one of the most satisfying meals anyone has tasted in weeks. Not because it is elaborate, because it is enough. Warm soup, a modest slice of bread, a little meat. The soldiers sit together inside a damaged warehouse while snow falls silently beyond broken walls. Nobody speaks loudly. The warmth of the food encourages quiet reflection instead. One man removes a photograph of his family before eating. Another folds a letter into his pocket after reading it once again. Someone smiles while describing the smell of bread baking in his hometown. For a little while, conversation replaces silence. History often remembers Stalingrad as one of the greatest battles ever fought. It certainly was. But beneath the enormous movements of armies lived countless ordinary moments rarely described. Quartermasters counting sacks of flour, cooks scraping the bottom of empty kettles, soldiers dividing the final loaf into equal slices, men warming frozen hands around bowls of soup before taking the first careful sip. Wars are decided by strategy. They are endured through routine, through logistics, through meals that grow steadily smaller. As darkness settles once more across the frozen ruins of Stalingrad, you finish the last spoonful of warm broth and hold the empty mess tin in your hands. Outside, the wind continues its endless journey through broken streets. Inside, the kettle grows quiet. Sometimes the greatest act of endurance is not charging forward. Sometimes it is simply gathering for one final warm meal before another long winter night. Tea without bread, British soldiers in the Crimean War. A morning of tea and mud. Take a slow breath and picture a wide, windswept plateau overlooking the Black Sea. The year is 1855. You are a British infantryman serving outside the port city of Sevastopol during the Crimean War. The Great Siege has already lasted for many months. Newspapers back home write about famous charges and battlefield victories, yet your day begins with something much quieter. Mud. The ground beneath your boots is no longer really soil. Weeks of rain have transformed roads into deep channels where wagon wheels disappear almost to their axles. Every step pulls at your boots with heavy resistance. Horses struggle, mules hesitate, supply wagons creep forward only a few yards at a time. Before breakfast, there is work. You help reinforce drainage ditches around the camp. Water gathers everywhere. Canvas tents sag beneath the weight of rain. Blankets remain damp even after hanging beside small fires. Boots are cleaned each evening only to become soaked again before sunrise. The weather shapes every routine. far more than enemy fire. Nearby, the regimental cook has already begun preparing the morning meal. His equipment is simple: a large iron kettle, several blackened cooking pots, stacks of firewood carefully protected beneath canvas sheets. Steam slowly rises into the cold morning air. The menu would have seemed ordinary to any British soldier of the period. Tea, bread, salted meat, sometimes oatmeal, occasionally cheese. When supplies arrived on schedule, these simple meals provided enough strength for another day of trench work and guard duty. But today, something is missing. The bread wagons have not arrived. Again. Quartermasters consult inventory ledgers, while teamsters report another convoy delayed by washed-out roads. Ships continue unloading cargo at the harbour of Balaclava, yet moving those supplies inland proves painfully slow. The distance is not great. The conditions are. You receive a tin mug filled with hot tea. Its warmth spreads quickly through cold hands. Tea occupies a special place in the British Army. It offers warmth, boiled water that is generally safer to drink, and a familiar taste reminding soldiers of home. Many veterans later wrote that even when food became scarce, a cup of tea could briefly restore morale. You sip slowly. The drink is strong, slightly bitter, wonderfully warm. Without bread, however, breakfast feels incomplete. One soldier jokes that the tea has become the entire meal. Another quietly agrees. No one blames the cooks. Everyone understands the true problem lies miles away on muddy supply roads. Military logistics rarely appear dramatic, yet every loaf delayed by mud eventually reaches an empty table. Around the camp, routine continues despite hunger. Uniforms are brushed, rifles are cleaned. Engineers repair earthworks damaged by overnight rain. The siege continues not only through battles, but through thousands of ordinary tasks repeated every day. As clouds drift low across the hills, you finish the last sip of tea and look toward the distant road where supply wagons should soon appear. The road remains empty. The wagon road to Balaclava. Another morning arrives beneath grey skies. Rain has finally stopped, but the roads remain deeply scarred by weeks of heavy traffic. You are assigned to help unload a supply convoy, making its slow journey from the harbour. The trip from Balaclava should take only a few hours under good conditions. Instead, it often requires an entire day, perhaps longer. The wagons move carefully. Each one carries flour, preserved meat, medical supplies, blankets, candles, and animal feed. Every crate matters. The horses breathe heavily as they strain against deep mud. Drivers speak gently to them, conserving their strength. One broken wagon can delay dozens behind it. The work is patient, almost peaceful. You lift sacks of flour one by one into a temporary storehouse protected by canvas. Nearby, army bakers prepare portable field ovens. Once enough flour arrives, fresh bread can finally be baked. The smell of yeast soon begins drifting through the camp. Few aromas lift spirits more quickly. British Army records from the Crimean War frequently mention the enormous logistical difficulties created by weather, poor roads, and inadequate transportation during the early years of the campaign. These hardships contributed to shortages that later inspired major reforms in military supply organisation. History often remembers the famous figures associated with the war. Less remembered are the thousands of wagon drivers, labourers, engineers, dock workers, and bakers whose daily efforts kept the army functioning. By late afternoon, your company receives its first fresh bread in several days. The loaf is modest, still warm. Each soldier receives only a small slice. Nobody asks for more. Everyone knows another company is waiting. Tea is served once again. This time, it has a companion. The bread is soft, simple, fresh from the oven. Sometimes the smallest improvement changes the entire day. Evening. Beside the kettle. The siege continues. Weeks pass. The weather improves slightly as spring slowly approaches the Crimean Peninsula. Supply systems become more reliable. Roads remain difficult, but engineers improve them steadily. Railway construction eventually begins, allowing supplies to move far more efficiently toward the front. The daily routine settles into familiar rhythm. Morning inspections, work parties, guard duty, meals, tea, letters from home. You find yourself helping the cook more often now. The kitchen has become one of the quieter places in camp. Large kettles simmer gently throughout the afternoon. Salted beef softens after long hours of boiling. Vegetables, when available, are added carefully. Nothing is wasted. The cook measures flour with practiced hands. Fresh loaves cool on wooden boards before being divided among the companies. His work receives little recognition, yet every soldier knows his value. One rainy evening after supper, you remain beside the fire while the kettle continues steaming softly. Around you, several comrades clean their mess tins. Others mend uniforms by lantern light. Someone quietly hums a familiar tune from home. No one rushes to sleep. The warmth of the fire is too pleasant to leave. Historians often credit the Crimean War with transforming military medicine, communications, and logistics. The lessons learned from delayed supplies, poor transportation, and inadequate planning influenced armies across Europe for generations. Behind every reform stood ordinary experiences like yours: a missing loaf of bread, a delayed wagon, a cook waiting for flour, a soldier grateful for nothing more complicated than hot tea shared beside a fire. As darkness settles over the camp outside Sevastopol, you finish your final cup and place the empty mug beside the cooling kettle. Tomorrow, another convoy will leave Balaclava. Another baker will knead dough. Another wagon driver will guide tired horses through the mud. History remembers the Great Siege. But perhaps it should also remember the quiet comfort found in a single cup of tea, especially on the mornings when there was no bread to accompany it. Emergency rations inside a U-boat, life beneath the Atlantic, the smell of fresh bread. Take a slow breath and imagine leaving the open sky behind. You climb down a narrow steel ladder, one careful step at a time, into the confined interior of a German Type 7 U-boat during the Second World War. As the heavy hatch closes above you, daylight disappears, replaced by dim electric lamps and the quiet hum of batteries, pumps, and diesel engines. The air feels different almost immediately. It is warm, humid, filled with the scent of machine oil, fuel, damp clothing, and dozens of men sharing a remarkably small space. There are no wide hallways, no private rooms, only narrow passages winding between pipes, valves, electrical panels, torpedoes, and tightly packed bunks. Every available space has a purpose. Even food becomes part of the architecture. At the beginning of a patrol, fresh provisions are loaded wherever they can fit. Loaves of dark rye bread are stacked above torpedoes. Sausages hang from pipes running along the ceiling. Potatoes are packed beneath bunks. Cabbages are tucked into corners between machinery. Cans of preserved meat, coffee substitute, dried peas, beans, and condensed milk fill every remaining compartment. The submarine leaves port carrying enough food for several weeks, sometimes longer. For the first few days, meals feel surprisingly generous. Fresh bread, butter, cheese, smoked sausage, coffee. The cook, usually assisted by other crew members, works inside a galley so small that turning around requires careful planning. One compact stove serves the entire crew. Nothing is wasted, not because supplies are already low, because there is no room for waste. You watch the cook slice bread with remarkable precision. Every loaf is carefully measured. Fresh bread must be eaten first before mold begins to appear in the damp atmosphere. Potatoes follow. Fresh vegetables disappear next. Only later will preserved foods dominate every meal. The routine never changes. Breakfast, maintenance, watch duty, repairs, lunch, sleep, another watch. Life aboard a submarine follows the clock rather than the rising and setting of the sun. The sea above remains invisible. Inside the steel hull, time is measured by shifts, not daylight. The crew quickly develops habits. One sailor always drinks coffee from the same dented mug. Another saves a small piece of chocolate until evening. The radio operator carefully folds every ration wrapper before throwing it away. Tiny routines create a sense of order within the confined world beneath the Atlantic. Military historians often describe submarines through patrol reports and sinkings. Less often do they describe the remarkable logistical planning required simply to feed 40 to 50 men inside a steel cylinder crossing an ocean. The galley becomes the quiet heart of the submarine. Meals break the monotony. They remind everyone that another day has passed. As the diesel engines settle into a steady rhythm, you finish your final piece of fresh bread. You wonder how long the loaves hanging above the torpedoes will last. Counting every biscuit, 2 weeks pass. Fresh bread has disappeared. The potatoes have begun sprouting. The last apples were eaten several days ago. Now the meals rely almost entirely upon preserved foods carefully loaded before departure. The cook opens another tin of canned meat. Nearby, dried peas soak in water before becoming soup. Hard biscuits replace fresh bread. Powdered coffee substitute fills steaming mugs. Life aboard the submarine has grown even quieter. Humidity clings to every surface. Clothing never completely dries. Condensation forms along the steel hull before dripping gently onto the deck. Fresh air exists only during brief periods on the surface. The smell inside changes slowly. Diesel fuel, machine oil, cooking, human breath, salt water. Everything blends together into an atmosphere every submariner remembers for the rest of his life. Meals remain surprisingly important. The cook carefully plans every day's menu. He knows exactly how many tins remain, exactly how much flour is left, exactly how many biscuits each sailor may receive. Emergency rations are never touched unless absolutely necessary. They remain sealed inside waterproof containers, insurance against disaster. If mechanical failures or enemy patrols prevent returning to port on schedule, those emergency stores may become the difference between survival and starvation. Nothing is opened early. Discipline protects everyone. The officers eat the same food as the crew. Space is too limited for elaborate distinctions. Everyone shares the same kitchen, the same table, the same concerns. After supper, several sailors gather around a tiny folding table. One quietly writes a letter he knows cannot be mailed until the patrol ends. Another studies a navigation chart. Someone else peels potatoes that have already begun softening with age. No one complains. Routine itself becomes comforting. The submarine continues westward beneath endless waves. Somewhere above, storms move across the Atlantic. Below, another kettle begins to boil. The last tin before home. Several more weeks pass. The patrol is nearing its end. The cook now works with astonishing efficiency. Very little remains. A handful of dried beans. Several tins of preserved meat. Hard biscuits carefully counted before every meal. The emergency rations remain untouched. That alone feels like a quiet success. Fresh water has become precious. Cooking is planned to conserve every litre. Soup serves two purposes. It feeds the crew. It also provides warmth in the cool steel compartments. You notice how slowly everyone eats. No one hurries. There is nowhere else to be. Outside the hull stretches thousands of meters of open sea. Inside, the rhythm of the submarine never changes. Engines, pumps, voices kept deliberately soft. The cook opens what will likely be the final tin of preserved meat before reaching home. He slices it evenly. Every portion nearly identical. No one asks for extra. Everyone understands fairness. As evening arrives, word quietly spreads through the boat. Landfall may come tomorrow. The announcement changes nothing immediately. Watch schedules continue. Engines require maintenance. Navigation remains constant, yet smiles appear more easily. Someone begins speaking about fresh bread. Another dreams aloud about eggs cooked in butter. One sailor insists that his first meal ashore will include fresh apples. The others laugh. Not loudly, just enough. When the submarine finally returns to port, the first deep breath of cool outside air feels almost unbelievable. The smell of the sea replaces diesel fuel. Fresh wind replaces humid steel compartments. Nearby, bakery ovens are already working before dawn. The scent drifts gently across the harbour. Historians often remember submarines through battles fought beneath the Atlantic, but every successful patrol also depended upon quieter achievements. A cook who wasted nothing. A quartermaster who packed every compartment wisely. Crewmen who accepted simple meals without complaint. Emergency rations that remained unopened because careful planning had been enough. As you climb the ladder toward daylight, leaving the narrow steel world behind, you take one final look at the tiny galley where so many ordinary meals quietly sustained an extraordinary journey. Sometimes survival at sea was measured not in torpedoes fired, but in the final biscuit that never needed to be eaten. The quiet breakfast after victory. What soldiers ate when the fighting finally ended. The first morning without battle. Take one final slow breath and imagine a dawn unlike all the others that came before. For years, mornings had begun with routines shaped by war. Boots were laced before sunrise. Rifles were cleaned while the world was still quiet. Cooks lit field stoves long before the first soldiers emerged from tents, bunkers, trenches, or shattered buildings. Every breakfast carried an unspoken question. Would there be enough? Would the convoy arrive? Would tomorrow's meal be smaller than today's? Now, at last, those questions begin to fade. It is the spring of 1945 in Europe. Victory has arrived unevenly. In some places, the fighting has ended suddenly. In others, scattered gunfire still echoes in the distance. Yet for countless ordinary soldiers across the continent, this morning feels different. The field kitchen is no longer hidden beneath camouflage nets. Smoke rises openly into the cool air. No one worries that its thin grey column will attract enemy artillery. The cook begins his work before dawn exactly as he has done for years. Some habits survive every war. Large kettles fill with clean water. Fresh bread arrives from mobile bakeries. Crates of eggs, butter, flour, potatoes, and canned fruit appear beside the cooking area. Supply officers no longer count every loaf with anxious precision. Railroads are reopening, bridges are being repaired. Long columns of trucks once carrying ammunition now transport flour, milk, vegetables, and medical supplies. Logistics quietly return to peace. You stand patiently in line holding your familiar mess tin. The same tin has travelled across muddy roads, frozen forests, dusty villages, and countless camps. Its dents tell stories no words could fully explain. Today, however, something unexpected happens. The cook smiles, not because the work has become easier, because there is finally enough. He places scrambled eggs into your tin, then fried potatoes, a slice of fresh bread still warm from the bakery, a small spoonful of jam, finally, a steaming cup of real coffee. For several moments, you simply look at the meal. The smell feels almost unfamiliar. Fresh bread, butter melting slowly across its surface, coffee whose rich aroma fills the morning air. Nearby, another soldier quietly laughs while holding an orange. It is the first fresh fruit he has seen in many months. No one rushes to eat. The meal deserves patience. History often celebrates the grand announcements marking the end of war. Yet for many veterans, peace first became real in much smaller moments. A complete breakfast, a warm loaf of bread, a second cup of coffee without wondering whether supplies would last. The bakers return. As weeks pass, military life begins changing in quiet, almost unnoticed ways. Temporary kitchens become more permanent. Field ovens operate every morning. Bakeries that once produced emergency rations now return to making ordinary loaves. The smell of yeast once again drifts through towns that had known only smoke and dust. Army bakers have always been among the earliest to begin work. Long before sunrise, they knead dough, tend fires, and prepare bread for thousands of hungry people. During wartime, those loaves often travelled great distances before reaching the front. Now the journey grows shorter. Railway stations reopen. Road crews repair highways. Bridges destroyed during the fighting slowly return to service. Supply columns become less hurried. The quartermaster's ledger begins to change. Instead of recording shortages, he records deliveries arriving ahead of schedule. Fresh vegetables appear more often. Milk replaces powdered substitutes. Cheese returns. Seasonal fruit fills wooden crates. The menu grows familiar again. You help unload one of the bakery trucks. The back doors swing open. Rows upon rows of freshly baked bread greet you. The warm scent fills the cool morning air. For a brief moment, everyone simply stands there smiling. No speeches are necessary. The bread says enough. Nearby, children from the surrounding town watch quietly as military cooks prepare soup for both soldiers and civilians. Large kettles simmer gently. Today there is enough to share. War had taught everyone the value of every crumb. Peace teaches something different. The quiet joy of abundance. That evening, you eat outside instead of beneath camouflage. The sunset feels strangely calm. No one studies the sky for aircraft. No one listens for artillery. The only sound is the gentle clatter of mess tins and quiet conversation carried by the evening breeze. Remembering the hungry days. Months later, uniforms begin disappearing from everyday life. Some soldiers return to farms, others to factories. Some become teachers, mechanics, railway workers, bakers. The routines of peace slowly replace the routines of war, yet certain habits remain. Many veterans continue finishing every meal. Few willingly waste bread. Some quietly save small portions of food without even realizing why. Years of uncertainty leave lasting impressions. Historians often measure wars through territories gained, armies defeated, or treaties signed. Those achievements matter, but ordinary people remember different things. The smell of coffee after weeks without it, the warmth of soup on a freezing night, the sweetness of an apple after months of preserved food, the extraordinary comfort of fresh bread shared among friends who had survived together. Across Europe and the Pacific, millions of military cooks, bakers, farmers, sailors, railway workers, mechanics, warehouse clerks, nurses, drivers, and quartermasters had quietly sustained entire armies. Few became famous. Yet, without their patient work, history itself would have unfolded differently. Every battlefield depended upon kitchens. Every campaign depended upon supply wagons, cargo ships, trains, and field bakeries. Every victory depended, in some small way, upon breakfast. You finish the last meal of your service sitting beneath a peaceful morning sky. The mess tin that once carried watery soup and carefully counted crumbs now holds eggs, bread, fruit, and coffee. Its dents remain, its scratches remain. They are reminders, not only of hardship, but of endurance. You clean the tin one final time before placing it into your pack. Perhaps someday it will sit quietly on a shelf at home. Perhaps grandchildren will ask where those dents came from. Perhaps you will smile before answering. Because some of the most important stories of war were never about great battles. They were about ordinary mornings, about cooks rising before dawn, about bakers working through the night, about soldiers patiently waiting in line for one more meal, and about the quiet miracle of discovering that, after years of counting every crumb, there was finally enough for everyone. As the sun climbs gently into a peaceful sky, the camp grows quieter with every passing hour. The fires still burn beneath the kettles. Fresh bread continues cooling on wooden racks. Coffee steams softly into the morning air. The war has become history. The breakfast remains beautifully ordinary. And perhaps that is the greatest victory of all.